It was one of those typical Tuesday mornings where everything seemed to move in slow motion. The kind of morning where the rain tapped against the windows in a steady rhythm, and the whole world felt like it needed an extra cup of coffee just to get going. Ryan had claimed his usual spot in the corner of the coffee shop, right by the window where he could watch the rain create little rivers on the glass. His laptop was open in front of him, showing a half-finished design project that was due by Friday. But honestly, he wasn't really working. He was mostly staring at the screen, occasionally clicking around and pretending to be productive. This coffee shop had become his office over the past year. Working from home as a freelance designer sounded great in theory, but in reality, it meant spending way too much time alone in his apartment, talking to his cat more than actual people. So every morning he packed up his laptop and came here, where at least there were other humans around even if he didn't talk to most of them. The place was packed that morning. Spring rain always brought people inside looking for warmth and caffeine. The air smelled like fresh coffee beans and cinnamon, mixed with that earthy scent that rain brings with it. Someone's playlist was humming softly through the speakers, something jazzy and smooth that made everything feel a little more sophisticated than it actually was. Ryan was on his third cup of coffee, which probably explained why his leg was bouncing under the table. He'd been sitting there for almost 2 hours, and he'd managed to finish exactly one design element. Not his most productive morning, but hey, at least he wasn't at home watching cooking shows and pretending he'd make those recipes someday. That's when she came in. The door swung open with more force than necessary, letting in a gust of wind and rain. A young woman stumbled inside, completely soaked from head to toe. Her umbrella hung broken and useless in her hand. The metal frame bent at an odd angle like it had just lost a fight with the wind. And from the look on her face, she knew it. Her dark hair was plastered to her face, and her jacket was so wet it looked 3 shades darker than it probably was. She stood there for a moment just inside the door, looking both frustrated and slightly defeated. The kind of look everyone gets when the weather decides to personally ruin their day. Ryan glanced up from his laptop just as she started making her way through the crowded shop. The place was so packed that navigating to the counter was like playing a game of human Tetris. She was doing her best, apologizing to people as she squeezed past tables and chairs, still clutching that sad, broken umbrella. And then it happened. She was trying to get past his table when someone behind her shifted their chair back without looking. She had to dodge quickly, which threw off her balance. Her bag swung forward and knocked right into Ryan's table. The whole thing shook, and his coffee cup did that dangerous wobble where you're not sure if it's going to spill or not. Ryan's hand shot out automatically, steadying the cup just before disaster struck. His laptop, thankfully, was safe on the other side of the table. "Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry," she said immediately, her eyes wide with horror. Her cheeks flushed pink, which was pretty noticeable against her pale, rain-soaked skin. "I didn't mean to. This morning has been a complete disaster." Ryan looked up at her, and that's when their eyes met properly for the first time. Hers were a warm brown color, the kind that reminded him of honey when the light hits it just right. And even though she looked absolutely miserable, dripping wet and clearly embarrassed, there was something about her expression that made him smile. "Hey, no worries," he said, gesturing at his coffee cup. "I was probably due for a refill anyway. This one's gone cold." That was a complete lie. His coffee was still perfectly warm. But something about the way she looked so genuinely upset about almost spilling it made him want to make her feel better. "Are you sure?" she asked, still looking worried. "I can buy you a new one. Seriously, it's the least I can do after nearly destroying your laptop." "Really, it's fine," Ryan assured her. He held up the cup. "See? Not a drop spilled. You've got better aim than you think." That got a small smile out of her. Not a big one, but enough to show she was starting to relax a little. "Well, if you're sure," she said, tucking a wet strand of hair behind her ear. "I promise I'm not usually this clumsy. It's just been one of those mornings where everything that can go wrong does go wrong." "I know those mornings well," Ryan said. "Looks like your umbrella had the worst of it, though." She glanced down at the broken umbrella in her hand and let out a small laugh. "Yeah, this thing gave up on life about 2 blocks ago. Just completely surrendered to the wind. I probably should have just accepted defeat and called a cab, but I thought I could make it." Optimistic. "I like it," Ryan said. She smiled again, a bit more genuine this time, and Ryan found himself hoping she'd keep talking. But the line at the counter was moving and she glanced over her shoulder, clearly needing to order. "Well, thanks for being nice about it," she said. "And sorry again." "Nothing to be sorry for," Ryan replied. "Hope your day gets better. Thanks." "Me too." She gave him one last smile before turning to join the line. Ryan watched her go for a second before forcing his eyes back to his laptop screen. But he wasn't looking at his design anymore. He was thinking about the way she'd laughed at herself, even though she was clearly having a rough morning. A few minutes passed. Ryan pretended to work but found himself occasionally glancing toward the counter where she was waiting. She'd set down her broken umbrella and was checking her phone, probably texting someone about her disaster of a morning. When she finally got her coffee, she turned to leave. The shop was still crowded and she had to navigate the same obstacle course to get back to the door. And then, just before she reached the exit, she looked back. It was quick, just a glance over her shoulder. But her eyes found his table, found him, and for just a second, their eyes met again. She gave a small smile, almost shy, before pushing through the door and disappearing into the rain. Ryan sat there, staring at the door for a long moment after she'd gone. The coffee shop continued its usual rhythm around him. People talked and laughed, the espresso machine hissed and gurgled, someone's phone rang with an annoying ringtone. But he barely noticed any of it. He looked back down at his laptop, at the design that still needed finishing. But now the colors seemed wrong, the layout boring. His mind kept drifting back to that moment when she'd looked back. Was that intentional? Was she checking if he was watching? Or was it just a random glance that meant nothing? Ryan tried to focus. He really did. He moved elements around on the screen, changed a few colors, adjusted some text, but after 20 minutes of accomplishing absolutely nothing, he had to admit defeat. His concentration was completely shot. He caught himself looking at the door every time it opened, even though he knew she wasn't coming back. Why would she? She'd gotten her coffee and left. That was how coffee shops worked. Get it together, he muttered to himself, earning a curious look from the person at the next table. But even as he tried to force himself to focus on work, Ryan couldn't shake the feeling that something had just happened. Something small, maybe insignificant, but something. And he couldn't help wondering if he'd ever see her again. The rain continued to fall outside, and Ryan stayed in his corner seat until the coffee shop started to empty out for the lunch rush. He eventually finished his design, though it took twice as long as it should have, and the whole time part of his mind was somewhere else, replaying those few moments over and over. When he finally packed up his laptop and headed home that afternoon, he found himself hoping that maybe, just maybe, she'd come back to that coffee shop again, and next time, if there was a next time, maybe he'd actually be brave enough to say more than just a few polite words. But for now, all he had was the memory of a random Tuesday morning, a broken umbrella, and the way she'd looked back once before walking out the door. Ryan didn't plan to become a person who noticed patterns, but somehow over the next 3 weeks, that's exactly what happened. It started the very next day. Wednesday morning, same corner table, same laptop, same coffee order. He'd been sitting there for about an hour when the door opened and she walked in. Not soaking wet this time, thankfully. She wore a light blue jacket and had her hair pulled back in a ponytail. Their eyes met across the crowded shop. She smiled just a little and gave him a small wave. Ryan waved back, feeling his heart do this weird little jump that he definitely wasn't expecting. She got in line, ordered her drink, and left. The whole interaction lasted maybe 10 seconds, but Ryan found himself grinning at his laptop screen like an idiot. Friday, she came in again. This time she was wearing a yellow sweater that somehow made her look even more approachable. Same smile, same little wave. Ryan was starting to wonder if maybe this wasn't just a coincidence. By the second week, he'd started to notice her schedule. She didn't come every day, and it wasn't always at the same time. Sometimes she'd show up early in the morning, around 8. Other times, it was closer to 10. Once she came in during the afternoon, which threw off his whole theory about her being a morning person. The thing was, Ryan had no idea if he was imagining things or if maybe, just maybe, she was timing her visits around when she thought he might be there, because if he was being honest with himself, he'd started doing exactly that, showing up at the coffee shop more consistently, staying a little longer than necessary, always picking the same table where she could easily spot him. Their interactions were still brief, a smile here, a wave there. Once, when they passed each other near the counter, she said hey and he said hey back, and that was the extent of their conversation. But even those tiny moments felt like something. Then came the Tuesday that changed everything. The coffee shop was absolutely packed. Some kind of water main had broken down the street, forcing another cafe to close temporarily, and everyone had migrated here. There wasn't a single empty table in sight. People were standing along the walls, balancing their drinks and laptops awkwardly. Ryan had gotten lucky and snagged a table just as someone was leaving. It was a four-seater, way bigger than he needed, but he wasn't about to complain. He'd spread out his stuff, trying to make progress on a new project for a client who wanted something fresh but also classic, which basically meant they had no idea what they wanted. He was deep in concentration, playing around with different color schemes when he heard a voice. "Hey, I'm really sorry to bother you." Ryan looked up. There she was, holding her coffee cup in both hands, looking slightly uncomfortable. "Is anyone sitting here?" she asked, gesturing to the empty chairs at his table. "Every other spot is taken, and I've got about 40 papers to grade before tomorrow. I promise I'll be quiet and won't take up much space." "Oh yeah, of course," Ryan said, quickly moving his laptop and notebook to make room. "Please sit. I've been hogging this whole table anyway." "You're a lifesaver," she said, sliding into the chair across from him. She set down her coffee and pulled out a canvas bag that was absolutely stuffed with papers. "I'm Lily, by the way. I figured since we've been doing the awkward wave thing for 2 weeks, we should probably actually introduce ourselves." Ryan couldn't help but laugh. "Ryan. And yeah, I was starting to feel like we were in some kind of weird silent movie. Right?" Lily said, pulling out a red pen. "Like, at what point does it become more awkward to not say anything than to just actually talk?" "I'd say we passed that point around day 5, Ryan admitted. They both smiled, and just like that, the ice was broken. For the next few minutes, they worked in comfortable silence. Ryan returned to his design, and Lily started going through what looked like a mountain of student papers. But every so often, one of them would glance up, catch the other's eye, and smile. Finally, Lily let out a long sigh and set down her pen. "I swear, if I read one more essay that's just 5 paragraphs of pure chaos with no punctuation, I might actually cry." "Rough batch?" Ryan asked. "You have no idea. Don't get me wrong, I love my students. But sometimes I wonder if they think periods and commas are just decorative suggestions." She took a sip of her coffee. "What about you? What are you working on?" "Trying to design a logo for a client who keeps changing their mind about what they want," Ryan said. "This is version 12. 12. Lily's eyes widened. "That's intense. Freelance life," Ryan said with a shrug. "You learn to be patient. Or you learn to drink a lot of coffee. Usually both. So you're a designer? That's cool. What kind of stuff do you design?" And just like that, they were talking. Really talking. Not just polite small talk, but actual conversation. Ryan told her about how he'd started doing freelance work after getting tired of office politics at his old job. How some days he loved the freedom, and other days he missed having coworkers to complain with. Lily told him she taught middle school English and art, which explained all the papers. She talked about how much she loved teaching, but how frustrating it was dealing with budget cuts. Her school was threatening to eliminate the art program entirely, which meant she might lose half her classes. "The thing that kills me," she said, her voice getting more animated, "is that art class is where some of these kids really come alive. Like, I have students who struggle in every other subject, but give them paint or clay or even just colored pencils, and suddenly they're focused and engaged in creating these amazing things." Ryan could see how much she cared just by the way she talked about it. Her whole face lit up when she described her students' projects. "Have you thought about fundraising?" he asked. "Like maybe organizing an art show or something?" "We've tried a few things, but it's hard to get traction," Lily said. "Nobody wants to come to a middle school art show except the parents, and they've already donated what they can." They kept talking, the conversation flowing naturally from one topic to another. Ryan learned that Lily had grown up in the next town over from where he'd grown up. They'd probably driven past each other 100 times as kids without knowing it. She learned that he had a dream of eventually opening his own design studio, a real physical space where he could collaborate with other creatives instead of just working alone in coffee shops. "Why don't you?" Lily asked. "Open the studio, I mean." Ryan shrugged. "Money, mostly. And fear, probably. It's a big risk." "Yeah, but so is playing it safe your whole life," Lily said. Then she laughed. "Listen to me giving advice when I can't even save an art program." Hey, at least you're trying, Ryan said. That's more than most people do. They talked for almost 2 hours. Ryan's design sat forgotten on his laptop screen. Lily's papers remained mostly ungraded, but neither of them seemed to care. Other people came and went around them. The coffee shop slowly emptied out as lunchtime approached. The barista changed the music from jazz to something more upbeat. Finally, Lily glanced at her phone and groaned. I have to get going. I've got a meeting with the principal in an hour, and I should probably look at least a few of these papers before then. Yeah, I should probably actually finish this design, Ryan said, though he really didn't want their conversation to end. Lily started packing up her things, carefully stacking the papers back in her bag. She stood up, slinging the bag over her shoulder, and then paused. This was really nice, she said. Like unexpectedly nice. I don't usually talk to strangers in coffee shops. Same here, Ryan said. But I'm glad we broke that rule. Lily smiled. Me too, I'll probably see you around. Yeah, definitely. I'm here most mornings. Good to know, she said. And there was something in the way she said it that made Ryan think she'd definitely be timing her visits a bit more carefully from now on. As she walked toward the door, Ryan found himself hoping she'd look back like she had that first day. And she did. Right before she pushed through the door, she glanced over her shoulder and smiled. Ryan smiled back, already looking forward to the next time he'd see her. Emotional tone, growing connection, cautious optimism. Things were going well. Too well, maybe. That's what Ryan kept thinking as he sat at their usual table, checking his phone for the third time in 10 minutes. Over the past week, his coffee shop meetings with Lily had become the highlight of his day. They'd fallen into an easy rhythm. She'd show up around 9. He'd already be there with his laptop, and she'd slide into the chair across from him like it was the most natural thing in the world. They'd work quietly for a bit, then start talking, and before they knew it, an hour had passed. Yesterday, Ryan had finally worked up the courage to do something he'd been thinking about for days. He was going to ask for her number. Not in a weird way, just casually, like, hey, we should stay in touch outside of this coffee shop. Maybe suggest grabbing dinner sometime. He'd practiced the line in his head at least 20 times. He had it all planned out. But today, something felt different the moment Lily walked through the door. She looked distracted, her eyes scanning the coffee shop like she was searching for someone. When she spotted Ryan, she smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes the way it usually did. She walked over to their table, but before she could sit down, the door opened again behind her. A guy walked in, tall, wearing a nice jacket, the kind that probably cost more than Ryan's entire wardrobe. He had that confident air about him, like someone who was used to getting what he wanted. And the moment he spotted Lily, his face lit up. "Lily!" he called out, weaving through the tables toward them. Ryan watched Lily's expression change. Surprise, then something else. Confusion? Discomfort? He couldn't quite read it. The guy reached their table, and suddenly Ryan felt like he was intruding on something private, even though he'd been sitting there first. "Hey, I thought I might find you here," the guy said, flashing a smile that showed perfectly white teeth. "You mentioned this place was your new favorite spot." "Nathan," Lily said, and Ryan could hear the tension in her voice. "What are you doing here?" "I needed to talk to you," Nathan said. Then he seemed to notice Ryan for the first time. "Oh, sorry, didn't mean to interrupt. Are you two—" "This is Ryan," Lily said quickly. We share the table sometimes. Ryan, this is Nathan." The way she said it made Ryan's stomach sink a little. Just someone who shares a table. Not exactly how he'd been thinking about their growing friendship, but okay. Nathan nodded at Ryan, a polite but dismissive gesture, then turned his full attention back to Lily. "Can we talk? Just for a few minutes, please." Lily glanced at Ryan, and he could see the apology in her eyes. She looked torn, uncomfortable, like she was stuck between two places she didn't want to be. "It's fine," Ryan said, even though it really wasn't. "I should probably get going anyway. Got a deadline." That was a lie. He had nowhere to be. But sitting there while this Nathan guy clearly wanted to have some private conversation with Lily felt wrong. "Ryan, you don't have to," Lily started. "Really, it's cool," Ryan said, already closing his laptop and shoving it into his bag. He stood up, giving Lily a smile that he hoped looked more genuine than it felt. "I'll see you around." He didn't wait for her response. He just headed for the door, weaving through the morning crowd. Just before he stepped outside, he couldn't help himself. He glanced back. Lily and Nathan were sitting at the table now, the table that had started to feel like it belonged to him and Lily. Nathan was leaning forward, talking intently. Lily had her arms crossed, her body language closed off, but she was listening. Ryan pushed through the door and stepped into the cool morning air. The sky was gray, threatening rain again. Fitting, he thought. He walked home instead of taking the bus, needing the time to think. Who was Nathan? An ex-boyfriend, probably, based on the tension in that interaction. Maybe a current boyfriend? But that didn't make sense. Lily would have mentioned a boyfriend, right? They'd talked about so many things over the past few weeks. Or maybe he'd completely misread everything. Maybe those conversations that felt so meaningful to him were just casual chit-chat to her. Maybe he'd built up this whole thing in his head, while she'd just been looking for someone to talk to while grading papers. By the time Ryan got back to his apartment, he'd convinced himself that going back to that coffee shop was a bad idea. He'd been spending too much time there anyway, using it as an excuse to avoid real work. Maybe this was a sign that he needed to actually focus on his freelance business instead of daydreaming about a girl he barely knew. The next morning, Ryan deliberately didn't go to the coffee shop. He set up his laptop at his kitchen table, made his own coffee, and forced himself to work. He actually got a lot done, which should have felt good, but somehow just felt empty. The day after that, same thing. He stayed home, worked from his apartment, told himself this was better. By the end of the week, he'd almost convinced himself he'd made the right decision. Meanwhile, something else was happening that Ryan knew nothing about. Lily had gone to the coffee shop every single morning that week. Each time she'd walked in hoping to see Ryan sitting at their usual table. And each time she'd felt disappointment settle in her chest when the table was empty or occupied by someone else. She'd sit there anyway, trying to grade papers or read a book, but her attention kept drifting to the door. Every time it opened, she'd look up, hoping. But it was never him. That conversation with Nathan had been exactly what she'd feared it would be. He wanted to get back together. After 5 years of dating, followed by a messy breakup 8 months ago, he'd decided he'd made a mistake. He missed her. He wanted another chance. Lily had spent the last few days thinking about it. Nathan had been such a huge part of her life. They'd built something together, or at least they'd tried to. Breaking up with him had been one of the hardest things she'd ever done, but sitting across from him in the coffee shop, listening to him talk about all the things he'd change, all the ways he'd be better, she'd realized something. She wasn't comparing Nathan to who he used to be. She was comparing him to someone else entirely. She was comparing him to Ryan. The way Ryan listened when she talked about her students, actually interested, asking questions. The way he got excited about his design work, but also wasn't afraid to admit when he was struggling. The way he'd look at her across the table, really seeing her, like she was the most interesting person in the room. Nathan was talking about the past, about what they used to have. But Ryan represented something different, something new, something that felt like it could be real if she'd just let it. The problem was she'd tried. She'd given Nathan her number again, agreed to meet him for coffee once, then twice, trying to figure out if what they'd had was worth fighting for. But every time they met, she found herself distracted, wondering what Ryan was doing, wishing she was at the coffee shop instead. By the end of the week, Lily had made her decision. She'd met Nathan at a park near her apartment, somewhere neutral. She'd been gentle but firm. They'd both changed too much. They wanted different things now. And trying to force something that was over wouldn't be fair to either of them. Nathan had been upset, but he'd understood. Or at least he'd said he understood. Maybe someday they could be friends again. But not now. Now they needed to move forward separately. Lily had felt lighter after that conversation, like she'd finally closed a door that should have been closed months ago. She'd walked home planning what she'd say to Ryan the next time she saw him. She'd explain everything, apologize for the awkwardness, maybe even admit that she'd started looking forward to their coffee shop mornings more than she probably should have. But the next morning, when she went to the coffee shop, Ryan wasn't there, or the morning after that. By day 5, Lily was starting to worry that she'd messed everything up. That awkward moment with Nathan had probably made Ryan think she was unavailable, or worse, that she wasn't interested, and now he was avoiding the coffee shop because of her. She thought about asking the barista if they'd seen him, but that felt too desperate. She thought about trying to find him online, but she didn't even know his last name. So she just kept showing up morning after morning, hoping that eventually he'd come back. 2 weeks had passed since Ryan last set foot in the coffee shop. 14 days of working from home, convincing himself he was being productive, that he was better off focusing on his career instead of getting distracted by someone he barely knew. But the truth was, he missed it. He missed the ambient noise of the coffee shop, the smell of fresh espresso, the way the light came through the windows in the morning, and if he was being completely honest with himself, he missed her. His phone buzzed on the kitchen table. A message from a potential client, someone he'd been trying to land for months. They wanted to meet, but there was a catch. The company was based in Seattle, and they wanted him to relocate. Not just for the meeting, but permanently. They were offering him a full-time position, creative director, good salary, benefits, the whole package. It was exactly the kind of opportunity he'd been hoping for, the kind that could change everything. Ryan stared at the message for a long time. A year ago, he would have jumped at this without thinking twice, but now something made him hesitate. Or someone, more accurately. He had 1 week to decide. 7 days to figure out if he was going to pack up his entire life and move across the country for a job, or stay here in a city where he'd been feeling stuck for the past 2 years. Ryan spent the weekend thinking about it, making pro and con lists, talking to his cat like she could somehow give him advice. By Monday morning, he'd almost convinced himself that taking the job was the smart move, the logical choice. But there was one thing he needed to do first. One place he needed to visit one last time before making his final decision. Monday evening, right before closing time, Ryan walked back into the coffee shop. The place was quieter than usual. Most of the afternoon crowd had already cleared out. A few people sat scattered around with laptops and books, soaking up the last bit of productivity before heading home. The barista was wiping down the counter, probably getting ready to close up. And there, sitting at their usual table by the window, was Lily. She had a book open in front of her, but she wasn't reading. She was just staring at the pages, her chin resting in her hand, looking lost in thought. The evening light came through the window behind her, making her hair glow golden around the edges. Ryan's heart did that stupid jump thing again, the same way it had the very first time he'd seen her. He stood there for a moment, just inside the door, wondering if he should leave. She hadn't noticed him yet. He could turn around right now, walk out, and she'd never know he'd been there. But then, as if she could sense him watching, Lily looked up. Their eyes met across the coffee shop, and Ryan watched her expression change. Surprise first, then something else. Relief, maybe? Or was he just seeing what he wanted to see? Lily closed her book and just looked at him, waiting. Ryan took a breath and walked over to the table. His hands were shoved in his jacket pockets because he didn't know what else to do with them. "Hey," he said, stopping a few feet away from the table. "Hey," Lily replied. Her voice was soft, uncertain. "Mind if I sit?" "Please." Ryan pulled out the chair across from her, the same chair he'd sat in dozens of times before. It felt familiar and strange at the same time. They sat in silence for a moment. The coffee shop's background music filled the space between them, some indie song about second chances. "I'm sorry," they both said at the exact same time. That broke the tension a little. They both smiled, just slightly. "You first," Ryan said. Lily shook her head. "No, you disappeared. You should go first." Ryan ran his hand through his hair, a nervous habit he'd never quite broken. "I thought, that day when that guy showed up, Nathan, I just figured I was in the way. You two clearly had history, and I didn't want to be the awkward third person sitting there." "You weren't in the way," Lily said quickly. "That whole situation was just complicated." "Ex-boyfriend?" Ryan asked. "Yeah, 5 years together, broke up 8 months ago. He wanted to try again." Lily fiddled with the corner of her book. "I thought maybe I should at least hear him out, you know? Give it a real chance instead of just dismissing it." Ryan nodded, even though hearing this was harder than he'd expected. "Makes sense. 5 years is a long time." "It was," Lily agreed. "But you know what I realized? Sometimes things end for a reason, and trying to bring back something that's already over doesn't change that. It just delays moving forward." She looked up at him then, really looked at him, and Ryan felt like she was trying to tell him something beyond just the words. "So you're not..." Ryan started, then stopped. Sorry, that's none of my business. We're not getting back together, Lily said firmly. I told him that last week. It took me a while to figure it out, but some doors are meant to stay closed. Relief washed over Ryan, stronger than he'd expected, but it was quickly followed by guilt. He was about to tell her something that might make this whole conversation pointless. I'm glad you figured it out, he said. You deserve to be happy, not stuck trying to fix something that's already broken. Thanks. Lily smiled, a real smile this time. So where have you been? I've been coming here every morning for 2 weeks. I thought maybe you'd found a new coffee shop with better coffee and less drama. Ryan let out a breath that was almost a laugh. The coffee here is still the best in the city. I just needed some space to think. About what? This was it, the moment where he either told her the truth or made up some excuse. Ryan had never been good at lying. I got a job offer, he said. A really good one. Creative director position at a tech company in Seattle. It's the kind of opportunity that doesn't come around very often. He watched Lily's expression carefully. She was trying to keep her face neutral, but he saw something flicker in her eyes. Disappointment? Sadness? That's amazing, she said. And she sounded like she meant it, even though her voice was a little tight. Seattle's supposed to be beautiful. Yeah, I've heard that too, so you're taking it? Lily asked. The job? Ryan hesitated. I have to decide by Friday. It's a big move. New city, new life, all of that. But it's what you wanted, right? Lily said. You talked about wanting to work with a team again, having a real studio space instead of working alone. This is your chance. It is, Ryan agreed. But he didn't sound excited about it. He sounded like someone trying to convince himself of something he didn't quite believe. They sat there in silence again. The barista had started stacking chairs on tables at the other end of the shop. Closing time was approaching. Can I ask you something? Lily said finally. Sure. Why did you come back tonight? If you've been avoiding this place for 2 weeks and you're probably leaving anyway, why come back now? Ryan looked at her, really looked at her, and decided that if he was potentially moving across the country, he had nothing to lose by being honest. Because I couldn't make the decision without seeing you first, he said. I know that probably sounds crazy. We've only known each other for a few weeks. But these mornings, sitting here talking with you, they've been the best part of my day. And the thought of leaving without at least explaining why I disappeared felt wrong. Lily's eyes widened slightly. Ryan, I'm not saying this to make things weird, he continued. I just wanted you to know that meeting you mattered. That these conversations we've had, they've meant something to me, more than I realized until I stopped having them. For a long moment, Lily didn't say anything. She just looked at him, her eyes searching his face like she was trying to figure out if he really meant what he was saying. Then, slowly, she smiled. Not a big smile, but a genuine one that reached her eyes. You know what's funny? She said. For the past 2 weeks, I've been coming here every morning hoping you'd show up so I could tell you almost the exact same thing. That our conversations meant something to me, too. That I missed them. That I missed you. Ryan felt his heart do that jumping thing again, but stronger this time. Really? He asked. Really, Lily confirmed. I kept comparing everything to our mornings here. When I was with Nathan, when I was grading papers alone, when I was just existing through my day, nothing felt as right as sitting across from you in this coffee shop. The barista cleared their throat nearby. Hey guys, I hate to interrupt, but we're closing in about 5 minutes. They both looked up, suddenly remembering they weren't alone in the universe. Right, sorry, Ryan said, standing up. Lily gathered her book and bag, and they walked toward the door together. Outside, the evening had settled into that blue hour between day and night. The streetlights were just starting to flicker on. They stood there on the sidewalk, neither quite ready to say goodbye. So what are you going to do? Lily asked. About Seattle? Ryan looked at her, at the way the fading light caught in her eyes, at the hopeful expression on her face that she was trying not to show too obviously. I honestly don't know, he admitted. What would you do? Lily bit her lip, thinking. I think life's too short to always play it safe. But I also think sometimes the best opportunities aren't the ones that take you furthest away. Sometimes they're right in front of you and you just have to be brave enough to reach for them. That's pretty wise, Ryan said. I'm a teacher. Wisdom comes with the territory. They smiled at each other and something shifted in the air between them, something that felt like possibility. Can I walk you home? Ryan asked. Lily nodded. I'd like that.